Our first scripture today is Isaiah 58, verses 6 to 9. The writer of Isaiah reminds us that God's light shines most brightly when we serve humanity. Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bounds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. Our second scripture this morning is Matthew 5, verses 13 to 16. The gospel reading contains these familiar teachings from the Sermon on the Mount. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven.
First of all, it is an honor to speak to all of you today, especially on the subject of leadership. This is a subject I hold very near and dear to my heart, mainly because this is where I was introduced to leadership. It has defined my life spiritually, personally, and professionally, all thanks to South Street and the Disciples of Christ Church. From a very early age, I was given the opportunity to use my strengths and skill sets to represent myself, my family, my church, and my life through various leadership roles at South Street and various Disciples of Christ activities. When we first started attending South Street, I was 10 years old. And even at such a young age, the opportunities to lead were abundant and have continued into my everyday adulting life, thanks to South Street's adventures with children choir, diaconate, youth activities, summer camp. Our leadership positions started with small tasks, such as collecting offering during Sunday school. And the older we got, we were tasked with leading worship services during youth Sundays and planning Disciples of Christ youth events. It became very clear, regardless of age, personal strengths, and hyperactivity, that God had a place for me to shine at South Street. As our Chancel choir and the amazingly talented, wonderful, adorable children's choir, as they sang today, "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine." And thanks to our faith, no matter how small we feel or how insignificant we feel our talents might be, God is going to let you shine. I learned at an early age that if I was going to represent myself and my beliefs as God intended, then I had to live by faith and trust in God and His promises, and not to be motivated by only what we can see and hear in our present circumstances. I like how it says this, present circumstances. So many times, especially in our world today, our faith wavers on what is working in our favor or against us. For example, how many of us last week, during the second half of a certain football game, maybe made some pretty far-fetched prayer requests and maybe even questioned God's intent for the entire universe, all due to one present circumstance? Surely no one here, right? Right? Okay. We try not to let circumstances define us. Now, granted, there are some things that are out of our control. A very wise man by the name of Albus Dumbledore once said, "It is our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." You will always have choices, and hopefully you choose what is right instead of what is easy. My senior year at Culver Stockton College, I was at a crossroad in my life. I had a choice. I could follow my heart and go to seminary, or I could follow my heart and begin my teaching career. Yes, I said heart twice. Both fields are a calling. They're not just a career. They both appeared very rewarding and terrifying. I had faith in the plan that God had put in place. I just wish he had made it a little bit more clear as to what he wanted. So teaching was already a part of me. The world of education was all I'd ever really known for a long time. My sisters and I were the luckiest kids in the world to be raised by, as far as I'm concerned, the world's best teacher. My mom was and is to this day the epitome of grace under fire. I see everything that she did as an educator, mother, and an active member of South Street, and continues to do so, and it is awe-inspiring. I would sometimes overhear her talk about school, her lessons, her students, and as long as I could remember, I wanted to be a part of that culture. Her gift of leadership was sharing knowledge, and as a leader in her classroom, she learned just so she could give it to her students. Teachers, especially my mom, are lifelong learners. She was constantly learning new things or a better way of teaching, and it was all for her students. I wanted to, and still to this day want to be like my mom, and I told myself a long time ago, if I could be half of the teacher that she is one day, that I'd be doing okay. Her leadership has shown living a life of love, kindness, and grace. Now, my call into ministry was new and extremely scary, but exciting. I had amazing ministers. I had Janet, Max, George, and Joey, and I'd learned some really neat things from them. I had excellent religion professors and ministers in college who were constantly encouraging me to find the why. But not only that, the hardest part was a lot of times there was more than one why. The gift of leadership that they had was multi-tiered. Spiritual growth and comfort, along with experiences like mission trips, church camps, writing sermons, all of that sounded really exciting. And to think someone like me could help someone find their way to Christ. I look at everything that they lead and everything that they're responsible for, but they would make sure that they would meet me for coffee when I was home over Christmas break. They'd make sure I was invited on the mission trips, all while they were running a church. And in my mind, I'm thinking they're busy, they're working nonstop, they're meeting the spiritual needs of the community, but they just called to see how my first week of classes went. It was an exciting life. I could see that. And their leadership was also shown living a life of love, kindness, and grace. So, with all of this swirling around in my mind, I met with our campus chaplain and religion professor, Reverend Steve Mulholland. He had one of the most respected positions on campus. He was a teacher. He was a minister. So I just knew that he was going to tell me what to do. Hands down. Instead, he looked at me and said, "What if teaching was your ministry? And your ministry is teaching." A verse that I had always referred to was Jeremiah 29:11, and it became so much more profound at that time. And it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." And it became very, very clear that leadership isn't about a facility. It's about the capacity. Leaders don't tell you how to do it, they show you how it's done. So I've been a teacher for 17 years. I use the leadership skills South Street taught me, and I use them every day. I remember what Steve Mulholland said to me. Teaching is a ministry, and ministry is a teaching. And like I said earlier, God gave everyone the ability to help in the church. And as my niece Abby would say, sharing is caring. So let's take all these gifts of leadership, with us into the world and share our faith. Thank you.
So I grew up in the Church of Christ. I attended church 3 times each week, Sunday school or Bible study twice each week. So I learned about the Bible. I learned Bible stories, the key verses. And I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, in a single-car household. So I went where my parents went, or I made my own arrangements. At age 9, I was learning to navigate my neighborhood by bicycle. Also at age 9, I took the public bus to a youth meeting at church. I walked to all of my elementary schools, and I took the bus to high school, and when the bus schedule did not fit my schedule, I bicycled. I was watching what was happening around me with interest. I had an appointment downtown the day President Kennedy was shot, and I saw the National Guard armored personnel carriers running up and down the street that afternoon. The first Sunday of June, 1966, I stood in the front yard of the church, and I watched James Meredith and a few other men walking down Highway 51 as they began their march against fear toward Jackson, Mississippi. I took an early interest in high school in water quality, in air quality, use of insecticides, and how people live together as a community. Busing of the black students into my school began in 1966, but that didn't really seem to affect me. Then came 1968. I witnessed the sanitation strike in Memphis, during which Martin Luther King was assassinated. I had many feelings, from fear to sadness to horror, as riots erupted in Memphis, and once again the National Guard took over the streets. I graduated from high school. Bobby Kennedy was shot. I went off to college. I watched anti-war protests and race protests and wondered how I should be involved, what my reaction should be. My environment was mostly white, but I began to meet a few black people and professors in college. Then I met Shirley, and our journey began as a shared journey. We became involved in the Spirit movement in church, and as the congregation that we were attending condemned all of our associates, we began a journey through different denominations to find our place in a spiritual community. As Shirley and I began a family, being a church was important to us. We found a small Disciples of Christ church in which we felt at home and which provided a good environment for our children. It had a strong Disciples women's group and a small Disciple men's fellowship, and people dedicated to education and activities for children and youth. So we participated in that congregation's change from all male elders and deacons to include women. When we moved to Springfield, we found South Street to be friendly and to be in a similar place in its spiritual journey as we were. So you know much of the rest of our history. We brought the importance of involvement in Disciples men and Disciples women's activities with us and quickly became leaders in those fellowships here in this congregation. We enjoyed the family retreats years ago, and the music programs, the youth programs, the Sunday school classes, and the Sunday school class parties. The activities here in our congregation and the regional and national retreats and fellowships. We have enjoyed the connections to the universities, the deep intellectual thought, and the spiritual depth of many of the people here in the South Street congregation. You were a part of our spiritual development and awakening, and we thank you for helping us successfully launch our 2 children and being a part of our spiritual lives. All right, so much for history. What are the elements of my faith, and how does my faith inform my daily life? Last week's and today's lectionary text closely align with how I try to live my life. As Micah said in chapter 6, verse 8, what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. There is a community here at South Street that supports my life code and shows up at many of the same places that I show up. My faith informs me that we need equity for all in our community, and that includes transportation equity. Everybody walks or has some form of ambulatory transportation. We should have continuous sidewalks for all trips. It should be easy for us to walk from our residence to a convenience store, to restaurants, to school, to a bus stop, and from a bus stop to places of employment and offices and places of major retail purchases. Parts of Springfield should be dense enough to support frequent bus service and continuous safe bicycle routes so that it is possible to save the cost of owning and operating a car and still be able to get around. Springfield is compact enough that I can bicycle to most of my destinations in under a half hour, and anywhere in Springfield in less than an hour, much faster than it takes to ride the bus. I have been commuting on a bicycle for 25 years to show that it is possible to do it, to show others on the streets that there are people that bicycle, and to keep myself fit. I'm a part of an organization that is trying to bring a bike share system to Springfield. I participate in several organizations where I advocate for improved sidewalks, bikeways, and public transit. My faith informs me that I should respect God's creation. I am active in Ozark Greenways and pay attention to several water quality organizations. A natural forested buffer on each side of a stream filters the water entering that stream, shades the stream, keeping it cool, supports marine life, and reduces erosion and potential peak flood levels. A path in that greenway beside the stream provides a place for us to travel from one place to another, to visit nature, to decompress from the anxiety of our life, and to visit with other people. I advocate for these additions to our community. My faith informs me to support those shown injustice by our community. While in my youth, I watched and wondered what I should do. Our Christian community in the Springfield area encouraged me to join with them in resistance to injustices against other races, sexual preference, low income, and homelessness. I participate in marches and activities to support justice and call out injustice. My faith informs me to be kind, to visit sick and lonely, and to listen to those in need of an ear. This is how my faith informs me and guides my life.